I could feel very high.
It's a new day on the Enterprise, and Tucker's enjoying some downtime. Not for long, though, as the plot's just arrived in the form of us slowing down and meeting with a large, angular ship. Archer calls to say Tucker's skills would be welcome, and off we go to a docking port. Bert and Ernie here have a problem with a life support system, not the main one on their ship, but rather the stasis pod that houses their passenger. It's a long journey, you see, and having her suspended means she doesn't need things like food or air. If she wakes up, there won't be enough for the remaining several months of the trip. Tucker's up for the challenge, and while Bert enjoys our hospitality, Ernie shows him the job. It's all a bit on the jury-rigged side, which is a diplomatic way of saying it's a proper shithole. Tucker thinks he can get it working, though, meaning the woman inside the pod, who he decides to have a look at, should stay asleep. Back on the Enterprise, Bert's visiting Archer. We've been looking over their ship and discovered it's relatively slow by our standards, so much so that if they stayed docked with us, we could get them where they're going in just 4 days. Bert declines the offer by saying it would inconvenience us, and when Archer tries to insist, instead argues it would bugger up their schedule. The woman's family isn't expecting her for 5 months, aren't even at their homeworld right now, in fact, so there'd be no point. Curious, then, that Tucker's heard a different story. Hoshi's over on the alien ship to help translate their computers, and Tucker's telling her that Ernie said the passenger is studying medicine at a research colony. He doesn't have details, though, so maybe that's where Bert and Ernie picked her up, and this is the return trip. Misunderstanding or not, Hoshi leaves him to it, after suggesting he's a little too interested in looking at the passenger, meaning Tucker's alone when the banging starts. Well, I suppose he's not technically alone, because the banging's coming from inside the pod. Our guests are dining with Archer and T'Pol when Bert's phone sounds an alert about the pod. With apologies to the other diners, he leaves to investigate. Tucker's trying to jimmy the pod open by the time Bert gets back there, as the passenger is suffocating. He manages to get it open in time for the irate passenger to shout gibberish at him, her presumably speaking a different language to our guests. Oh, and her hands are tied, but Tucker doesn't have time to register this, as Bert twats him over the head. A call to Ernie from Bert explaining that there's been a slight problem has him leaving as well, and Archer trying to call Tucker. When he can't get through, he gives Reed a bell instead. The result is Ernie being met by Reed and a mate on the way back to his ship. As soon as Bert sees Ernie has an escort, he starts pooping yellow at the group and legs it back inside. Putting his foot down lets him break free, so we give chase. A bit of pooping from us convinces him to stop, though not for long. He farts out some science wibblies that bugger our engines, giving him the chance to scarper in peace while we sort them out. Tucker wakes up on the alien ship and is immediately twatted again by the woman he freed. She'll be getting a lot of screen time, so let's pull out a rare second act wheel of names and see what we'll be calling her. Ramses Niblick III, Kaplunk Kaplunk, whoops, where's my thribble, provided by Ensign Captain Picard. Ramses Niblick III, Kaplunk Kaplunk, whoops, where's my thribble, is understandably a touch cautious. Waking up locked in a fridge will do that to you. Tucker's calming motions are interrupted by Bert arriving with a gun, so Tucker places himself in harm's way. Bert still wants the stasis pod fixed, and as he's armed, Tucker decides playing along is probably the smart call. Saying it'll take a few hours seems to satisfy Bert, so he buggers off again. Untying Ramses Niblick III's wrist goes a fair way towards proving he's not a threat, and she helps find Tucker's translator when he describes it with hand motions. That leaves them able to talk, eventually, and once Tucker establishes the Enterprise is no longer in range, we get a little lore dump. Ramses Niblick III, Kaplunk Kaplunk whoops where's my thribble, is, it may surprise you to learn, not a paying passenger. She's actually a kidnapped royal one Bert and Ernie plan to ransom. She also thinks waiting around for rescue is the smart call and tries ordering Tucker to obey this command. He thinks one of the escape pods is a better plan, and when she tries to order him again, he politely tells her to bollocks and sets to work. Back on the Enterprise, Ernie's trying to frame himself as a victim. He's also claiming he knows nothing about the entire situation, including where they were headed or how to help track the ship. Archer decides to stick him in an airlock, so he has a little time to think. Over on the alien ship, Tucker's still working, and Ramses Niblick III's being a proper asshole about it. Not being listened to is bad enough, but from someone of Tucker's station? Her actions don't match her scorn, though, and once it's clear he does actually have a plan, combined with the thought of staying here for the next 5 months, she decides to join him. Discovering the escape pods designed for single occupancy is not well received. She can't fly one herself, though, so in they both go. They survive exiting warp speed and are even lucky enough to find themselves near a star system, which is handy when the average distance between stars in the Milky Way is about 5 light-years. That's still a day or two trapped in a cramped pod, though, so given how unpleasant this will be, Tucker suggests they call a truce on all the bitching, and Ramses Niblick III agrees. Archer's decided to take a different approach with Ernie, and that approach is to just make shit up. That's why we're going through a sham trial, with Archer saying T'Pol's the one in charge, and she's partial to a bit of the old execution. T'Pol laying it on thick is enough to get Ernie worried, which was the point, of course. Archer says he can call in some favours to make the sentence significantly less fatal, on the condition that Ernie shows his remorse by helping us find his ship. The person Archer's looking for is no longer on that ship, and the truce with Ramses Niblick III, kaplunk, whoops, where's my thribble, is showing some strain. A look around finds something that's technically food, and Tucker tries to make small talk while they eat, during which we learn Ramses Niblick III's duties afford her no time for things like relationships. A little pity from Tucker is rebuffed, though not entirely unkindly, so he returns to work. Probably wise, as they're soon approaching their destination, and he needs to see if any of the planets are capable of supporting life. One looks promising, and they don't have a whole lot of alternatives anyway, so he tries for a landing. One rough touchdown later, and they're in a swamp. Out of the pod we go to find a temporary home, during which Ramses Niblick III notes Tucker is bleeding. He tries to shrug off treatment until she phrases it as self-interest, then strips down to let her tend it. This, coupled with Tucker saying he thinks they'll be able to find enough food, puts them both in a more positive mood. It doesn't last long. Ramses Niblick III is unaccustomed to manual labour like finding firewood, or people like Tucker answering back when she says it should be his job. The argument escalates enough for her to take a swing at him, and the resulting tumble puts them both in some decidedly brown water. The thought of what microorganisms might now be swimming up their orifices isn't enough to stop the fight, but Ramses Niblick III deciding to mash faces does the trick, and off they go for a bit of the old dirty little bastard. The campsite afterglow is almost romantic, until they're interrupted by a beeping. The noise is coming from the pod, and Tucker thinks it's a tracking beacon, so he smashes it. Bert turning up a little later is thus not much of a surprise, though he himself gets a surprise when the blue uniform he shoots at turns out to be empty. That's because it's a trap, and Tucker jumps him. This goes badly for Tucker, and he ends up on his arse, so Ramses Niblick III gives Bert a bonk on the noggin instead. They're busy looking for his gun when they hear someone else approaching. Not to worry, though, as it's just Archer and company with a nice cosy rescue, now that the danger is already sorted. The Enterprise has met up with a ship to hand over Bert and Ernie. We're also saying goodbye to Ramses Niblick III, kaplunk, whoops, where's my thribble, so that's a bonus for me at least. Tucker probably wouldn't be welcome for a social call due to her status, but maybe that's something she could change when she takes the throne in a little under a year, so we'll leave Tucker to learn the value of delayed gratification as we get ready to take another step on the long road. I sometimes have a look at the background of a story when I write these analyses, and it was with a little surprise that I noted today's offering is considered among the top 10 worst episodes of Trek ever to have been broadcast. Now, there's no need to jump into the comments to accuse me of being deliberately contrarian here, because I'm by no means saying it was good, and there are certainly plenty of things to complain about. The featured guest character is entirely one-dimensional, and Padma Lakshmi's performance lackluster at best or utterly stilted at worst. Whether that's due to her or the direction she was being given, I don't know. Perhaps somebody thought having royalty be stiff to the point of wooden was fitting for the character, but the end result is still enough to give all of her scenes the feel of a school play. The story is predictable, with the eventual coupling happening not due to any sort of chemistry between them, but rather because that's what was expected.
Personally, I think it would have been far more interesting for them to continue going at each other's throats. It certainly would have added something fresh to the tired save the princess trope. Even video games had figured out they needed to start subverting that particular cliché by this point in time. The plot is full of holes, too. When we found out about a passenger in what could very generously be described as unusual conditions, and that their destination was only 4 days away for us, why didn't we just call to confirm? That's less than 2 light-years at warp 4.5, a distance we know our long-range comms can cover, as we've had plenty of occasions calling home via relays that were further away, or communications with Vulcan vessels planning to rendezvous multiple days into the future. If the whole 5 months thing was entirely made up, them refusing to give us the means of calling to check it out would have provided the same result. Just accepting all of this at face value is naive to the point of foolishness. A problem with distances permeates the whole thing, in fact, such as Archer saying the alien ship could be a half-dozen light-years away after its scarpers. At the stated max speed of warp 2.2, those half-dozen light-years would have taken about 6 months. And for those paying attention, yes, half a dozen light-years is significantly further than we said we could do at warp 4.5 in 4 days. I generally don't bother with tracking speed and distance in Trek these days because it's bloody pointless, but this one was a particularly egregious bag of bollocks. Then there's the escape pods, which are an absolutely awful design for humanoids. A small, waist-height opening into the thing you need to use at speed in an emergency? Horseshit. Based on Enterprise's track record on this topic, I wouldn't be at all surprised if that whole setup was contrived purely for tearing the skirt off to show a little leg. And let's add Archer telling Burt he could dock a cargo ship bigger than our entire vessel in the Enterprise's launch bay, shall we? That feels like another example of the artists and writers not talking to each other enough, but it could also be a script change after the CGI order was given. I've read that this one underwent some very heavy editing indeed. So is today's episode shite? Well, yes, for all of the reasons I've given, but despite those complaints, despite quite a significant list of grievances, I'm not convinced it should qualify as one of the most hated episodes ever, when we've got stories that transcend bad and achieve outright bigotry, looking at you, basically any episode that features a stereotype of the Irish. And there are a handful of curiosities in here as well. For a start, it's one of the few episodes that actually makes an effort in the translation department. Tucker being unable to read Bert and Ernie's computer consoles, despite talking to them, is a nice little nod to those being two very different things that are often conflated as one. It's pleasing to see us putting in the work on this one. Slightly more tenuous is the possibility of another Trill-adjacent species. Ramses Niblick III Kaplunk Whoops Where's My Thribble features a variation of those telltale spots on the side of her head and neck. We've seen this before and pondered what it might mean in terms of Trill having galactic cousins, so this is more fuel for that fire. Was that choice more likely to have been made because such markings are both quicker than a latex appliance and keep the actor more conventionally attractive? I mean, yeah, probably, but it's still a valid observation. Those of you who've seen my previous musings on the history of Trill and how such a setup would be ripe for abuse from a dictatorship might even draw conclusions about today's references to royalty. I wonder if the ceremony for becoming first monarch involves a worm. And yes, I'm aware those markings are here today because this is a reference to TNG, but that itself has implications we'll deal with in due time, especially when you consider that their Trill were very different indeed. Lastly, we have some questionable actions from Archer in this one, not just the sham trial and threat of execution, which are bad enough on their own by the way, but also sticking Ernie in an airlock. More specifically, he's put into the airlock of docking port 2, which is the same one that was damaged when his buddy buggered off. Doing that without a full repair would be dangerous at the best of times, but we didn't even have our chief engineer on board to check it over first. That we play off what essentially amounts to torture as comedy is rather tasteless, but Archer's willingness to do it might have some merit in regards to his character. For as much as we've shown his ethical growth, he's still no Johnny Picard, and Tucker is basically his bestie, so I don't think such actions are beyond him. We'll consider it a probably unintentional reminder that we humans aren't exactly enlightened by this point. So, is today's episode a stinker? It's not good by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm still not convinced it deserves to go in the Hall of Shame. Of course, this is the opinion of someone who thought Threshold had some value and didn't entirely hate Move Along Home either, so maybe you should bear those in mind when you weigh my thoughts on the matter. Either way, I'd still agree with the common consensus of this being a story you don't need to watch more than once. End of episode.
All right then, lad, give it to me. What's the latest plan to stretch out these credit skeets?
2 words. Clip show.
2 words, get fucked.
Don't be like that. It's perfect. Every show that needs to pad things out runs a clip show.
And they're always the most original, best received ideas, are they?
Of course not. They're complete trash. You wanted filler and I've got the goods.
No, can't do it, son.
Why not?
Because of my creative ethics. Yeah, that'll do.
Hold on a minute. What's this really about?
I'm sure I don't know what you mean. It's just that I think the viewers deserve more.
Now I know you're full of it. The viewers deserve more? You've never had respect for them before, even the ones who give us money.
They don't give us money, they give the Spostain who runs this channel money.
That's not the point. There's more to this.
Look, just let sleeping canine analogues lie, all right?
No. Either you give me the real reason or I run a clip show.
No, all right, fine. If we do a clip show, it'll be blindingly obvious just how much me voice has changed. The lad who makes these don't know his acting arse from his voiceover elbow. You know that pilot episode of The Simpsons where everything's weird as all buggery? Well, it's like that. He didn't settle on this until we're a good couple of years in. Just let it go, all right? I'll help you brainstorm the next one.
Are you sure that's all?
Absolutely.
It's not because you don't want to analyze why he felt comfortable settling on a miserable generic northern bastard voice, and what that might say for how he's come to think of you?
This conversation's over. Woof.